Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Negotiation. This episode is part one of our discussion with Louis Houdart, founder of Creative Capital. He is also an entrepreneur, business and investment coach, board member, and advisor to many startup companies. The Creative Capital China team has worked with European companies in China as well as pushing little-known Chinese brands out into the Western markets. By establishing pre-eminent international brand awareness and strong brand relationships, Creative Capital is one of the only firms in China that focuses on widening awareness of Chinese companies beyond their home market. We kick things off by asking Louis to share his story about how he founded Secret Garden, which leads to a broader conversation discussing what Chinese culture means to him. We then discuss how he was able to sell Secret Garden, which led to the opportunity to build a men's fashion brand called 16N that was later invested by Sequoia Capital, all building the foundation for what is now Creative Capital. Along this conversational journey, we cover the importance of strong concepts, branding excellence within China, and just how important it is to always focus on a brand's image. Enjoy.
When I realized it was impossible to scale, I started to find a way to actually sell the company. And I was in discussion with a large e-commerce player in Europe who was interested to try their foot into the Chinese market and looked at what I was doing. They were not interested in my retail part, but were interested in our know-how and operations. And they were also interested to put a fairly small amount of money to develop the e-commerce part in China. And obviously, as you know very well, China is not a place where you come with a small amount of money when you want to play on the e-commerce part. The benefit of having this discussion is things never being completely secretive. Some of my suppliers in Shanghai heard I was having some discussion and they came to me with an offer to purchase the business from me.
Home to over 4 billion people, the Asia-Pacific region boasts one of the most powerful consumer markets on the planet. Not only is it home to half of the world's under 30 population, but it's also home to more than half the world's internet users. It's a market that no globally minded organization should ignore. But entering markets like China, Japan, or Southeast Asia is no easy task. Just ask the likes of Microsoft, Google, Uber, and Facebook. However, times are changing, and with the right partners, doors are slowly opening as more and more companies find success growing their key markets in APAC. I myself spent 8 years in China, mostly as a venture capitalist, helping early-stage tech companies grow in the Asia-Pacific market successfully. This show is dedicated to uncovering and examining successful Asia market entry and growth strategies by interviewing the experts who've done it before and truly understand what it takes to be successful in the region. My name is Todd Embley, and welcome to The Negotiation, brought to you by WPIC Marketing and Technologies. Louis, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Todd, for having me here.
We'd love to place you on the map for the audience, so please tell us, where are you recording from today?
It's actually a good starting point. I'm right now in New York, and the reason I'm in New York is I've been traveling around the world for the last 7 months. So I left Hong Kong mid-December last year.
Now, somebody who grew up in Europe, fair to say you're French?
I'm Parisian. I'm French.
So you grew up in Europe, grew up in Paris. How did you end up in China?
It's a good question. I mean, I would not lie to you to tell you since I was a young kid, I was in love with Chinese language. I ended up studying in Europe, and I did a first internship in Singapore, and that was back in '98. And once in Singapore, it was really my first encounter with Asia, and Singapore was an amazing place, an amazing platform for this because it's very. Everybody speaks English, and it's very convenient to commute and to travel around the place. And I started to learn Chinese language back in Singapore. Start to travel all the weekends, where I had some saving from my small internship salary in Asia, and I ended up during Christmas in Beijing, on a freezing cold in Beijing, winter '98, and I decided to do my second internship in China, and that's how I really discovered China, and I stayed basically. So that was at the beginning random luck who led me to China through Singapore.
We're going to jump in and out of your background, your resume, your CV, so to speak. And I wanted to jump in first around a company called Secret Garden. Tell us what it is, what do they do, and what was your experience with them like?
Sure. So Secret Garden, all these years in China, I was always an entrepreneur. So pre-Secret Garden, I was a crude oil tanker broker. And being in an industry I was not really enjoying myself. I mean, very interesting. I mean, obviously, energy and transport is a very, very big industry and very much linked to the development of China. But I'm a consumer guy, and I was missing the connection with end consumer. So we were in 2006 in Shanghai, and China was changing, both in terms of the way consumers were consuming and also in the way brands were developing in China. And I saw a market opportunity in the retail of flowers, flower shops, basically. And I opened, still as a broker, one flower shop, which was in Xintiandi, which is like across the stream from Xintiandi, which you probably know, like a high traffic, sophisticated place in Shanghai. And somehow it was a success. And I quit my job as a broker, opened a second shop, 5, and then within a glimpse of a time, I had a small network of stores, flower shops, with one B2C business, most of my stores being one shop next to Xintiandi, and then the other part of my stores being in a place which have changed a lot, being in premium shopping mall in Shanghai. And back in that time, premium shopping mall in Shanghai were the Carrefour mall in the suburb of the city, which is really funny because obviously now Carrefour has left China and consumers went back to the city center. So it's a very much of a different China. So I was opening my stores in Carrefour Shanghai to capture these upper middle class going into the malls, a little bit like in the US culture, enjoying the driving to the shopping mall, and then also surfing on the wave of all these luxury brands splashing insane events all around Shanghai, inviting VVIPs, and with a very big need of flower decorations for their events. So I had two business, all within Secret Garden. Was the B2C, and then the other one was the B2B.
For anybody who has spent any time in China, there may be a good chance, as you've driven around the city, that you have seen just even the big floral arches. I think for any, store opening, any celebration, the floral component to the glitz and glam show that is these things, because they do put on the show, right? They really like to do it up really nice, and a traditional dress and very, very ceremonial culture. So the floral component of that is not nothing. It is actually quite big business, is it not?
Definitely. And then on the top of this, you've got also, of course, the wedding business, which is also something very big. So in terms of the top line, it was an interesting business. In terms of the operation, it was a total nightmare. For many different reasons. First reason, and on things which I didn't plan enough carefully on my business plan pre-store opening. And here again, it's very interesting because we are talking China 2006 versus China today. So China 2006, my suppliers didn't have a bank account. So I had to pay my suppliers every single day at 5 o'clock in the morning in cash. And they will not take credit from me. I mean, obviously now with WeChat Pay, Alipay, and so on, it's a very, very different game. But back in that time, flower shops, suppliers didn't have bank account. Second issue was the HR issue. To operate a flower shop, you need different qualities. You need people who are, obviously honest, because if you are handling cash at the purchase early in the morning, you're also handling cash in the store, which of course makes it even harder when it's fresh product that you make within the store. So you need them to be honest. You need them to be talented designers. You need them to be commercial, and you need them to be relatively smart, and it's a lot of quality within one same person, which otherwise would do the job by themselves. So the HR was so painful, and my shops being all around the cities in shopping malls, Carrefour, the flower market open at 4:00 in the morning, and you have to be there because you are paying in cash. Also, and it's if it's not you, you are taking a big risk with a product which change price every day. And then my stores were open from 8:00 in the morning to 11:00 in the evening, Monday to Sunday. So running around the city, collecting cash, making sure the store are well approvisioned. And then on the top of this, you had the events. On the events, obviously, they are Saturday and Sunday. It's not like F&B business when you can prepare in advance, froze the food. You need, suddenly you sign a big event and you need 2 days in advance, work out on a massive event and find the right product, the right supply chain of flowers. So very, very, very difficult in terms of operation. Very, very hard to scale. So I had my small network of 13 stores going around the cities while I used to be a lazy crude oil tanker broker. Extremely fun and meaningful experience, but on the day-to-day operation, a complete nightmare.
For those who hear this story, it's almost fantastical, and I know that even you and I would think, from where we come from to these type of operations, just the logistical, the financial, the wads of cash, it's truly kind of wild east entrepreneurial hustling. You just all hours, everything is on the table, you're working all night. It's chaotic. Completely chaotic. And you wonder how you ever survive or were ever able to build or grow something. I don't know how to convey that to the audience through this, but I can only try to put myself in their shoes and listen to you go, wow.
And it's also a cash business in the sense that bottom line was profitable per store, but we are also growing very quickly. So opening lots of stores. And therefore you are in a negative capex business where you finance the deposit for the rent, then you pay for the renovation, then you pay for the stock, and then hopefully you start to sell flowers. So which means by growing fast, I was also burning lots of cash with obviously all the stress attached to it, which is on the 20th of every month, am I going to be able to pay my rents? On the 25th, not my own rents, the rents of my stores and my office. On the 25th, am I going to be able to pay for my employee salaries? And then on the 29th or 30th of every month, am I going to be able to pay my own rent? And somehow, by some sort of magic, every month, managing to do it months on months after, and I'm not really sure how it is in Canada. For instance, in France, it's fairly easy to get bank financing. As a small entrepreneur in China, I mean, you are definitely on your own. So you need to find a way to make the business continue to roll.
That's another thing. I mean, getting the registration for the company, getting the bank accounts. It is in all ways so very different. I wanted to ask you about what you learned about doing retail, but listening to you, I almost think that the retail, and correct me if I'm wrong, was a small part of the business compared to the supplier, distribution, logistics, and events side, almost on a B2B side. Probably quite a bit more. So I'm not even sure if asking you about what you learned about retail can even compare to what you learned about the other aspects of the business.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I mean, definitely the main profit and was coming from the B2B and on the events. However, the retail was creating lots of traction in terms of marketing, brand image, and also volume plus kind of weekly volume, because obviously the event is on the weekend, but you still need to have flowers every day. So it was a very nice combination of the two business.
For the past 11 years, been the founder and or the ex-CEO of Creative Capital China, which is kind of China's first branding agency, really. And it was focused on helping Chinese brands tell their stories. So let's dive into that. tell us a little bit from the early days, from since 2011. What made you decide that you needed to create a company like this? Where was the inspiration from?
The story of Creative Capital is very much, of course, linked to the story of Sequoia Garden. And I think it's also very much linked to the way China entrepreneurship has been developing. So being a very fluid thing. So I had this beautiful little business of Sequoia Garden. It was very painful to operate, but still an interesting small business. When I realized it was impossible to scale, I started to find a way to actually sell the company. And I was in discussion with a large e-commerce player in Europe who was interested to try their foot into the Chinese market, and looked at what I was doing. They were not interested in my retail part, but were interested in our know-how and operations. They were also interested to put a fairly small amount of money to develop the e-commerce part in China. And obviously, as you know very well, China is not a place where you come with a small amount of money when you want to play on the e-commerce part. The benefit of having this discussion is things never being completely secretive. Some of my suppliers in Shanghai heard I was having some discussion, and they came to me with an offer to purchase the business from me. So that's how I got rid of Sequoia Garden. And then what happened before to go into Creative Capital? A good friend of mine in Kunshan, who was herself franchisee. So China retail business traditionally was made of retailers, brands. China is a very big market, growing up their business through local franchisee. Because, of course, if you are in North China, it's going to be first very, very far from South China, but it's also going to be different climate, different chain of shopping malls, different type of consumers, different customer habits, and so on. So most of Chinese brands have been traditionally developed in China through franchisee. And this friend based in Kunshan was kind of the local super franchisee. So she had around 150 stores in Kunshan of probably 20 different brands. And we were in 2009 or 10, and she wanted, like many other franchisee and brands, go up into a value chain and create her own brand. And she came to me and telling me, I love what you did at Sequoia Garden in terms of creating a brand from scratch and managing to sign good leads and having good marketing and brandings thanks to your concept. So please do the same for me and create a menswear brand. And I did that with her. So I was a small partner in the business, and we created a brand called Shelyuan, 16N. We did one shop, we did one fairly nice concept, one fashion show, and somehow, a little bit by magic, thanks to a very good concept and storytelling, we managed to raise, through bridge loan, money from Sequoia, which is obviously a very big VC fund, in the US, but also very active in China. And this created a kind of crazy snowball effect in the sense that many people from the Chinese fashion ecosystem were all a little bit like my friend Eda, also trying to transform their factory into launching their own brand or having this kind of aging retail concept. They came to me asking, could you do the same thing with what you did with 16N? Because I also want to create a brand, and 5 years from now, I want to IPO. And that's how Creative Capital actually was born. So that was kind of a collateral, not damage, but collateral effect of creating this fashion brand after the Sequoia Garden effect.
We speak to a lot of our guests about Western brands going to China. However, you work with Chinese brands. So I guess maybe my first question is maybe what is that like, broadly speaking? But how would you compare that to working with, say, European brands?
Yeah, that's a great question. And probably I should even explain you what we are doing in terms of branding, and also why Creative Capital was relevant in China, where it would not have been relevant, for instance, or less relevant in France or maybe in the US.
Yeah, let's start there.
Coca-Cola, LVMH in Europe or in the US, they don't create brands. They buy brands. And therefore, most of the branding agency in Europe or in the US are not really there to create brands. They are there to fine-tune an existing concept, which often is fairly good. I mean, if I work with Coca-Cola, I will not tell them to forget the red and to talk about enjoyment and happiness and so on. So there are strong brands which eventually will have a little bit of fine-tuning. In China, back in that time, in the consumer space, you had amazing entrepreneur, amazing products, amazing supply chain, amazing distribution, but few brands with a strong concept. So if you remember your years in Dalian or in Shanghai, how many consumer Chinese brands you could really remember standing for their own concept? Very, very few. And so this is what we are doing. So we would come and help to start from the storytelling of a concept, bring some what I would call story filling, and then worked on all the different brand assets, so the visual identity, packaging design, retail design, in a very, very 360, very quick approach, something that a project like this, if it would have been done for a big European brand, would have taken probably 2 years of work, 3 years of work, because first, the brand is very big, there's so many stakeholders, there's a very big in changing and risking to change the concept. Well, in China, first, the background of the brand is not as strong in terms of concept, and the market is changing very quick, but if you try to be perfect, the market is already gone, or there's already a competitors who have taken your spot. So we were trying to be maybe not 100% perfect, but being like 85 or 90% there, but in a very quick period of time. So concept would have taken 2 years in Europe. We were delivering them in 4 to 5 months.
The juxtaposition of working with European brands versus the Chinese, can I tease out some other maybe interesting nuances to how those relationships, how you work with a Chinese brand versus a European?
I think a big difference is most of the mid-sized to large Chinese clients that we had were most of them first generation business, started by an entrepreneur who works day and night and is very strongly emotionally attached to what he's doing. And therefore, which also, if you've got the trust on the reactivity, can go very quickly. So in Europe, usually, as I was mentioning, usually you would have many different stakeholders. You would have a marketing director who is not the guy who has started the brand. You would have a brand GM who often is also not the one who has started the brand. And therefore, the decision making is much slower and also much more complex. While and to come back to this amazing Chinese entrepreneur I used to work with, lots of them actually were super hardworking individual, not necessarily with a strong education background, but very intuitive. So very quickly, by working and discussing with them and presenting concept, they would intuitively decide which one would be the best for their market and consumers. And also sometimes actually saving all the long market research that some Western brands would do.
We've covered a lot about creativity and why it's important to be creative and be open to creativity when entering China. And I think we push that narrative quite often to prepare them to be flexible, to be open. Now, when, and especially when I'm trying to appeal to Chinese consumers specifically. So what do you believe creativity really means? Because I don't think we've actually explored what that creativity should mean. And so I'm curious from your perspective and what creativity might mean to you. And do you believe it means something different in the context of China than it does to the West or to Europe?
It's a good question. And it's, I don't have the perfect answer for this. Obviously I can give you what we hear fairly often about China when it comes to creativity, that in China, for instance, what we call a shefu, a master, is someone that will replicate to the perfection what his master used to do. And I guess that was probably somehow true in the past, I've seen so much creativity in China in kind of solving problems, turning around puzzles and solving them. I think there's definitely a lot of creativity, so much creativity in China going on. I mean, I think that's really a no-brainer answer to me. And I think where I've seen so many amazing Chinese entrepreneurs and colleagues and people around me is how to take an existing concept and make it better and quick. I mean, if we take the more simple example of in the tech product of WeChat, which is just a better product than WhatsApp, plus Facebook, plus I don't even use it anymore, PayPal and Twitter's, and it's just better, so much better. Actually, is WeChat a copy of WhatsApp? Of course, it's not. I mean, but it's just putting different things together and make it incredibly intuitive and user friendly. And I think this is something to me which has been absolutely amazing to learn from China and from Chinese.
We've talked a lot about, and by the way, WeChat. If there's anything I miss, this is WeChat. I love WeChat as a tech geek kind of person. I'm such a big fan of WeChat. I miss it dearly. We've talked a lot about what Chinese brands do well and how they are very successful with consumers in their own market and what we can learn from that potentially and tease that out and go the other way across the other side of the ocean. We've also discussed the speed at which China works. And I think regular listeners will understand at least that it's a lot faster than they might think. And then also how they leverage customer data and put that back into the production cycles, those iterative production cycles or creativity cycles potentially on how they're adapting and adopting and pushing into the market. So to avoid going over some of what we usually end up talking about quite a bit, is there any trends or tactics that you've seen emerging in the past couple of years that can really speak to what the Chinese brands are doing to succeed and maybe some sort of innovation that has come up amidst COVID and the lockdowns that has been kind of spurred forward because of that constraint?
Something which was, I think, talked quite a lot in the last year and a half was what's something called the lazy economy. So the lazy economy is basically the economy of the last miles, where you're going to have your food delivered on the bringing lots of conveniency to the world of these users and consumers. I'm not really sure, actually, I like the word lazy economy, because to me, this is actually not necessarily being lazy, just being, I would call even the smart economy. So allowing these busy white collars in Shanghai or Beijing or Chengdu to optimize their time so they can engage and go into other things, which could be spending more time with family, spending more time with friends, spending more time doing things that they enjoyed. So I think this lazy economy has been obviously booming. Though to me, it's more the smart. I would call it more the smart economy than the lazy economy. Another interesting trends which have been kind of a reaction to the different lockdown in China is all the outdoor next to the city thing. So glamping has been something which has been booming in urban cities with a little bit of grass. Another interesting sport, which nobody would have talked about 2 years ago, and now has been super hot on all the social network, is frisbee. The rise of Frisbee and many brands have been starting to do collaboration and things with Frisbee, which is, I think, something which has been also linked to younger consumers who wanted to reconnect with their friends with a little bit of outdoor.
Yeah, and do they have the leagues like where they play ultimate Frisbee? and do the teams.
Yes.
Yeah, they have that as well.
Yes.
That's interesting. That was definitely not, when I've been gone now 6 years. So I didn't know that both glamping, and we see that all over the world, right? Even Airbnb is rejigging their platform to focus on the unique experiences aspect. And this is where you start to see the yurts and the biodomes and all these interesting types of places. It's interesting to hear. I think you're the first person to actually call those two things out as really, really booming in China. So that's really great insight. Okay, I think we'll stop part 1 right there. Please join us next week for part 2 with Louis Houdart. Thanks for listening. Growing a company is hard. Doing it in a foreign market, exponentially so. The best piece of advice I can give you is not to do it alone. When you start looking at the Asia Pacific region for further expansion possibilities, and I sincerely hope you do, make sure you choose the right partners to do it with. My good friends at WPIC Marketing and Technologies have almost 20 years of experience helping brands, just like yours, enter China, Japan, and Southeast Asia. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Negotiation, and if you're interested in being a guest or want to connect with me or any of our team, please reach out to us at podcast@wpic.co, and be sure to rate, comment, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.